Okay, hello there, everyone. You guys there? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Let's pull up my chat here. Just one second. Well, yeah, thanks so much for meeting me online, guys. Sorry about the kind of the last minute change of plans there. But a few things just came up that I thought would make this easier. It'll be a pretty short lesson today, so that's one thing I thought about. My dog actually is very sick and can't really be left alone right now, so it's very helpful for me to be able to do this online. And also I thought, since it'll be a quick lesson, it can be more time. You guys can kind of spend working on the final projects on your own, just taking some time to do that after we end our meeting today. Just so you guys can hopefully keep the momentum going with the thumbnails and ideas you guys started on Monday, to get ready for a critique next week. Yeah. So to start, any questions or concerns or just anything you're wondering about the final project as you kind of worked on it last class and maybe thought about it a little bit more since then at all? Okay. If anything comes up while we are meeting today, please don't hesitate to ask a question. And please email me over the weekend or in the next couple of days if anything comes up that you would like to go over or have me explain in more detail. So today I'm just going to show you guys some student samples of final project so you can get an idea of what some really good projects look like. And I will also give a quick lecture on perspective and how to create depth in your compositions. Okay, all right. Hello, Emily. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for hopping online here. I know it was a late change to our schedule, but this definitely helps out and hopefully should be easier on my end and your guys' end as well. Okay, so let's just start by looking at some student art. So hopefully it's helpful for you guys to see that. I know I like to share that with you guys for every project. So I'll pull up some final project examples here to show you both kind of the layout of the full project, how it's saved in a PDF and the presentation of it. But then also just to see some of the final artwork. So just to note, I updated our the project description on Canvas. So I included some student samples here of final art. So just to have it there so you can reference these after the meeting today. So hopefully these can just give you some ideas, inspiration. You don't get to steal anyone's direct full composition, but you can borrow little things that they use, how they use values, kind of some shapes, or maybe how they use texture in different ways as well. So let's look at some full projects here and we can see some ones that were done really well. Okay, this is Austin's. This was the very first quarter I taught this class, and his was done really well. So I've always kind of shared Austin's. So just so you know, when we're looking at these, some of the requirements were slightly different in quarters past. It always kind of changes quarter to quarter depending on how the class goes. So you might see more workup sketches or more thumbnails or less final art or whatever it may be. Okay, so this is his thumbnails. This is hopefully the step you guys are on, working on thumbnails. So he's doing Frankenstein. And so he was kind of envisioning it more as kind of a cartoony style, a little more childlike and things like that. But you can obviously combine some of those moods we talked about. So he has some action and childlike together. But overall, it's kind of working for him to get a variety of different ideas. So the only thing here, rather than just saying book cover design, put what story you're illustrating here. So he should have put like Frankenstein book cover design or Frankenstein design or something. So just make sure you include the name of the story that you are illustrating. So I am just super clear on that when I am looking at your project. Okay, so here's a really good example of studies. Has anyone started their studies by chance? Anyone started on those studies or just getting reference photos? So look how loose and quick these are. Studies do not need to be finished artwork or like really nice drawings. It's just practice. So how does he want to draw the moon? How does he want to draw trees? How's he going to draw chains? And all of these might not end up in the final artwork, but some of them may. But it's good to kind of just practice these different things. We'll skip ahead. So here is his final workup sketch. So what is really good about this is he has an idea of texture and pattern. So you can see texture here in the grass, texture along the top of the grass, like how we did with that kind of that hill example, or the castle tower example where we changed the edge of it to show the texture. He has texture on the focal point, so that's really good. Putting texture on the focal point itself, and he has his values figured out. So he has where the light values will be, where the dark values will be, most of them right here on the focal point, and then he kind of has medium values around the rest of the composition. And here is the final art. So he obviously chose to focus here on a unique location, the castle where Frankenstein was created or whatever, where the mad scientist lived. But it's a unique design, cool silhouette shape, good use of pattern. And then you see texture in here, you see some pattern in here. So he has texture here in the foreground, on the trees, on the grass, on the building, but there's no texture here on the hills in the distance, no texture on this cloud or the moon. So it's good to leave that texture out some places and put texture in some places. Okay, this is Maria. Is this from a year or two ago? So she did Don Quixote. Again, put the name of your book cover there on each page. So thumbnails, very good. Thumbnails, very good. Studies, how does a horse run? What does a windmill look like? What are some different weapon possibilities for this character? So here they had to do more than one workup sketch. So this was the workup sketch she ended up doing. So here you'll see she ends up changing it in the final art. So sometimes your workup sketch will change. So if it does change, hopefully it changes for the better. So here she had a white or a light value horse against the white moon. So I think as she looked at this, I might have given her a critique, or she might have got critique from a friend or a fellow student. I forget how it kind of went down. But here, this is a much better decision by changing that horse to a dark value. So, and the character is a dark value, and that just creates an awesome silhouette shape here. So super good silhouette. Really clear here on the horse, really good value contrast as well. The only thing I would have said is maybe a little texture here in the foreground on some of these rocks. So she has some texture on the horse, which is good, and in the tail, and kind of on the sword and this little part of the knight in shining armor, this little feather thing that flies off. But a little texture here would have helped in the foreground. Very subtle texture that would have kind of really sealed the deal of this. But this is a really good one overall. Oh, this is Kayla's. This was a little more recent. This is like a quarter or two ago. So here we go, Jack and the Beanstalk. So having that labeled right here, that's a good way to do it. Thumbnails, different views. So the workup sketch, again, values, darkest value, also a dark value. So she had 2 focal points. So you may have 2 focal points in your composition. And if so, you should try and balance and have value contrast on both of those focal points. And it's nice how they're separated a little bit. So our eyes can go from one focal point back and forth and back and forth. But a good design for the house, cool design for the vines here. House studies or castle studies. vine studies, person studies, reference photos. Again, so try to avoid finding illustrations. So I would say find a photograph. So this one is better because it's a photograph of a castle possibility. Don't look at other Jack and the Beanstalk art. And then there's the final art. So this one is pretty good. It's not quite as strong as the previous ones. What I would have said is to make this whole vine darker. So she has kind of light and dark values on here. There needs to be some solid black here in this vine. But yeah, so we have the Jack character and good details and pattern and texture on the house. So this one is good, maybe not quite as strong as the previous ones, but also done very well. That's another good one. This one's good. So Red Riding Hood labeled right there, which is good. Thumbnails, workup sketch, studies. Here we go, reference photos. So this is a good example of reference photos. So pictures of wolves, pictures of someone wearing a cloak. How might that cloak look on a person? And what might a house look like? And then there's the final art. So very cool. This one's kind of a compilation image because, you know, the wolf isn't literally back here behind the house, but we're kind of suggesting that to the viewer that there's danger that lurks beyond the hills or something like that. So interesting use of texture here. So very stylized texture. It's not trying to be realistic for grass texture and things like that. Cool silhouette shape for the character. Good depth. We're going to talk about perspective today, having things that go back into space. And then she did a second one for extra credit as well. So this one also came out very nicely. So again, she's not literally interpreting, like the character does not stand on the wolf's head at any point in the story, but it's kind of creating a compilation showing, playing with size contrast here, playing with this creepy mood here. But I think it creates a really interesting and really unique composition and cool story as well. And then written reflection, which you guys will do. Excuse me. What's another good one? I would like to show. This one is also good for Hansel and Gretel, labeled. Thumbnails, workup sketch, studies, houses, nose, witch hats, candy. Again, photographs. These are great photographs, not other artists' illustrations. Kids, weird fingers, witch's hat, gingerbread house, and then there's the final art. So this one is really cool. I like, this is probably one of the best ones I've seen of this project. So this is an example of showing me everything you've learned. We got focal point, clear focal point. Really interesting silhouette shapes, clear mood. And then the pattern and texture in here is very subtle, which is good. I love this pattern in the background. So sometimes just having that pattern in the background can be a nice way to break it up. It's very subtle. It does not stand out a lot, which is good. And same with in the grass and on the road. So there is some texture here on the road, very subtle as well, and some grass texture down here along the ground. So a very good piece of art. She did a second one as well for extra credit, also done very well. Clear value contrast on the characters' faces, interesting storytelling details, and the trees going off into the distance. Okay, any questions after seeing these different examples and kind of what I'm looking for with these student samples? All right. So again, hopefully you guys are on to your thumbnails. Those should be rolling by now. And you know, if you get done with those and want to move on to a next step before our critique next week, put please feel free to send them to me ahead of time and I can look at them and give you suggestions, hopefully help make your art better as you move forward. Okay, let's talk about perspective. Okay, put on my screen share. Perspective. So we've talked a little bit about perspective before. Who has done some perspective drawings? Anyone? So there's a number of different types of perspective. Linear, actually. Okay. Sorry, just one second. Okay, perspective. Which is just creating depth in your drawing, depth, the feeling of a three-dimensional space or three-dimensional space within your drawing, because we're drawing on flat two-dimensional surfaces, so we're trying to give the illusion of depth in there. So there's a number of different types. Linear, atmospheric, which will probably be the main one we use. Atmospheric. Diminishing size and overlap. So pace spent, we'll spend the most time on atmospheric. That one is going to be something that most of you guys will end up using. I would think in this project, this is something I've seen people already use on previous projects. So that is the one we will spend our most time on. But just let's talk about linear really quick. Linear perspective is very tricky. It takes a long time to kind of master it and understand it, but you may just have a little bit of linear perspective in your drawing. And that's basically anything with straight lines. So we drew this example earlier in the quarter. So it's just basically the idea that two lines that are parallel. So you know that the edge of a road, when looking at it from above, the edges of the road are parallel lines, even the little middle line. So parallel lines will converge to a single vanishing point on the horizon line. And that's because things closer are bigger and things further away appear smaller. So this part of the road that's closer to us appears bigger versus this part that is smaller. Okay. So simple idea, but a little hard to execute. But most of the times I've seen in people's projects kind of drawing a path or a roadway as they work. So maybe you have it, you have kind of a more natural scene with like trees and bushes. And then you may have a roadway here. So sometimes you just kind of want to make sure that whatever is coming towards you is getting bigger as it comes toward you. So this pathway is coming towards us and it gets wider and wider the closer it gets. So, maybe you have a focal point over here, maybe you have a focal point right here. But the idea that whatever's here is bigger and whatever is back there in the distance is smaller. And linear just refers to using those lines to show it. And usually it's straight lines. You'll see it looking down a city roadway as well. But this is where having good reference photos will help. So if you need to figure out how to draw a road going away from us, Google search road going away, or road in a desert, or road in open highway, or looking down a city street. And this will hopefully help to give you some ideas for how to draw those different sorts of linear perspectives that may be kind of tricky to execute. Any questions on that, those linear perspective there? Oops. Sorry, just a sec. All right, so let's talk about atmospheric. That is the idea that for us, it will be shapes get lighter as they go further away from us. So I have seen some of you guys use this already in your drawings, which is very good to kind of, you know, practice that and be aware of it. But you will see this phenomenon anytime you can see land or basically anything kind of go back into the distance. So the place I see this lots of times is, you know, down along the, going along the beach or to the ocean, you'll see these pieces of land that kind of go off into the distance as they get further and further away from you. So there we got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of land that go away from us. So I'm just going to start and put a really light value on there. So really, really light something. There we go. And as I color in these different sections with different values, I'm just going to make these darker and darker the closer these get. So the idea here, it's really easy to see with color. So if we were doing color, the hills fade to the color of the sky. So they will be getting bluer and bluer, bluer and bluer if it's a blue sky. But here they are fading to the light value of that sky there. So you see this one here is about like a 75, 80 right here. Then we got like a 60 and a 40 and then a 20. So each one gets lighter and lighter as it goes further away, and it gets closer and closer to the value of the sky. So the sky is like a 10%. So this hill here is almost the same value, okay? And so let's say I was to come here and I wanted to put some grasses or maybe some leaves or maybe a tree branch here in the extreme foreground, so really close to the viewer. What value do you guys think I should make this stuff that is in the extreme foreground here? What value should I make this grass or that tree branch? Any ideas? Anne, Peter, Aitza, what do you guys think?
Black, poor black.
Exactly. I should make them black. Yes, 100% black. So I'm just going to use this pure black. And look how this creates that nice depth in this image. So if you have a shape in your composition that's very, very close to the camera or close to the front of the scene, you can just go ahead and make it solid black. So does that feel to you guys like these ones are really, really close to the camera, close to the what you're looking at? Hopefully, that should kind of be the goal. So, you know, you still may have like your focal point. So let's just say we have a, say you want a bird to be your focal point up here. If you still want that bird to be your focal point, you can still figure out a way to put the most value contrast right there on the bird. So even though I have solid black here in a few different places, black, 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 this one right here has the most value contrast because it's pure black against that pure white there. So that's where the most contrast is, even though I have those really dark values in different places. So you still have to balance this with where you're putting your values overall in the scene and where you want your value contrast. But in general, think about things closer to you are darker, things further and further away get lighter and lighter. So that should be your goal and kind of what you are thinking with this. Any questions on that one? Okay. Let's do another one, but let's use that texture and pattern as indicators of depth as well. All right, we did an example with this very early on, one of the first classes, our cityscape example. So I like to use this example because it has a very clear foreground, middle ground, and background. So which building, 1, 2, or 3 should have really thick lines around it?
Yes. Oh.
Yes, number 1. Thank you guys. Number 1. So using that line weight is definitely directly related to atmospheric perspective. So I like to think of this like the lines stay the same weight maybe, but the further away they go, the lines kind of start to fade away. So we talked about this last time or before. And if you were to put clouds here, they would have a very thin line. And sometimes you can do no lines around things that are further away as well. Okay. All right, so let's think about texture and detail. So buildings and cities have lots of texture and details. So we want kind of some brick or concrete texture, details of like windows and things like that. So again, what building, 1, 2, or 3 should have the most texture and details on it? Yup, exactly, 1. So 1, you can put all sorts of details down here, and especially if 1 is your focal point too, which it is in this case. So I can put lots of architectural details in here, details in the windows. This is kind of like that the city corner store example we did in class. Oh, I can put like, you know, little chimneys on here as well. And then here in the middle ground, I want to put some details. So I can draw some of these windows, but I'm not going to put like cracks or dirt or showing the exact texture of the building. And then number 3 here, that just stays as a silhouette shape. I don't need to put anything on there because making that just a silhouette shape will make it feel very far away. So you don't want to, I mean, if you start to put details on all of these, maybe you want a busy scene. So maybe you want to go for that busy mood, but it starts to busy it up. And then like, maybe I have, instead of a chimney right there, maybe I have my character as a focal point. Maybe got a character up here. Maybe that's my focal point. And that makes sense to have that just as a silhouette shape too. Okay. So texture and details that we were practicing in class. We want texture and details in the foreground and on the focal point, okay? But that adds depth to it. And it's just kind of, you know, it makes sense. We're not going to be able to see as many details on something that is further away from us. But you want to then eventually, when you work on this and add values, you will apply, you have values showing that depth as well as your texture and details and as well as your line weight. So it all is working together to really make a clear sense of depth in this drawing. And then I will probably want some solid black here in the foreground too. Okay, so your line work is working to show depth. Your values are working to show depth, and same with where you put that texture and details. So if I really wanted value contrast in here, I would probably maybe put like a little reflection or something along this building. So then I get more value contrast right there on my focal point character. So that's where you can kind of make up stuff and, you know, forget the rules of atmospheric perspective sometimes, because I want to make sure your value contrast should take priority to make sure we're looking right there. Okay. Any questions on this? So start thinking about this even when you're doing your thumbnails. Be like, am I going to have depth in this composition? Will I be using atmospheric perspective? Will I have a foreground, middle ground, and background? So it's good to think about that as well as you're working. Foreground, middle ground, background. So foreground here, middle ground here, and then distant background back there. Okay. Diminishing size. So very simple concept, but good to think about it as you may, as you're working on your project. So that's just the idea that you have one shape here. And if you repeat this shape and you want something to feel further away, then that will be a smaller shape. Okay. So here in this example, tree 1 is further away than tree 2. So, you know, maybe you work this into a design where we have a big tree here in the foreground. Maybe you got your focal point character walking along here. I like to try and make this an interesting silhouette, so I like to use those capes as good shapes. So we got one big tree here in the foreground. So it is a good idea to think about adding that depth, because then you can add smaller trees over here. And then maybe in the very far back, and you just see little bumps on the hills that are little trees. So the trees get less and less details. So here we got details. We can see all different texture on the tree. Here, they're just kind of shapes. And then back here, we're really just seeing the texture on the edge of that hill. But you see the trees getting smaller and smaller as we work. So it's just making sure that if you have an element repeating, it's getting smaller and smaller the further away it goes. So let's do it here for, you'll see it a lot with things like along the side of a road or a path. So maybe you have street lamps here, and as the path goes back, we have another one over here that's medium size. We got the big one here. Have a medium one over here. And then way back here, we can have a tiny little small one. Maybe put a little flag on here as well. Just to make the silhouette more interesting. We'll do it over here as well. This guy as well. So now we clearly have these shapes going off into the distance. If I want to add like a city or some buildings back here, I don't need details on these buildings. These are not a focal point. They're really far away. So I want to just leave everything here as simple silhouette shapes. And then if you do add texture here, maybe you'll have some grass texture here in the foreground as well. And maybe you'll have a little bit of kind of like concrete cracks or rough texture here on the path. And then maybe, you know, your characters are here together walking down the path. Okay. So the diminishing size of anything repeating in your composition. So just those lampposts getting smaller and smaller the further away they go. Okay. And then the last one, overlap. So that is very simple, but you want to make sure to use it well in your artwork. So here we have rectangle 1 and circle 2. I guess we don't need a number. We got rectangle and circle. Can I tell what is in front between these two shapes? Which one's in front and what one is behind? Well, in this case, with these very simple abstract shapes, I can't tell which is which, or which is in front and which is behind. So this idea is just giving the viewer a visual indicator as to what is in front and what's behind. So now all I have to do is overlap these two shapes. So I put the rectangle here and overlap this circle. So now, very simply, you can clearly see that the rectangle is in front of the circle. It's a very, very simple concept, but I will see people's artwork. Let's go back to our cityscape example. Actually, let's make a new page. Okay, cityscape example. I will sometimes see artwork like this. So you want to like be very clear to the viewer about what is in front and what is behind whatever they are looking at. Okay. So right now in this composition, there is no overlap. So someone submitted that for, you know, a workup sketch or a thumbnail, or even on their final project. What I would say is you need to explain the depth in this composition using overlap. So making sure that the foreground, middle ground, and background overlap in a logical way to explain to the viewer what is in front and what is behind. So how can we rearrange these shapes to go foreground 1, middle ground 2, background 3, distant background 4? Okay. So you might have to change where your shapes are placed in the composition. You might have to change the size of your shapes. So it makes more logical sense to the viewer. So what I would do is kind of stretch out this number 1 here. And we got number 2. I don't want to come down like this because here I can't tell what is in front and what is behind. So that edge touching is very awkward. So then I will extend this one over to here. So now there's my 2. My 3, again, I don't want it to be right here. Because right here, I can't tell what's in front and what's behind. There's no clear overlap there. Even if I put it right here, that's not working because I still can't tell what's in front or what's behind of those ones. So in order to put it in a good place, I would overlap it there just a little bit and have that one come out there. So there's not always exactly one way to do this. It's kind of just looking at your composition and helping it to make sense. If I was to add this little bit of smoke too, I would probably want that to overlap my cloud. And then maybe have the sun overlap behind this building. Oh, I should probably push this cloud. Right as I drew that, it started to look weird. So it overlaps behind that building there. So now we've gone from like no overlaps here in that first example to everything has a logical overlap that is clearly explaining to the viewer what's in front and what's behind. And then obviously you would put texture and details in here to make sense. You would use your line weight to give depth as well as your values for the atmospheric perspective. So you'll never just have one type of perspective. It will usually be a combination of both of them, or of all of these in a different way. Some linear, some atmospheric, some overlap, things like that. Okay, any questions on these? Anything need repeating? Okay. So hopefully that's all pretty straightforward. I just want to show you something really quick in Illustrator before we conclude today. Okay, we are going to draw a nice little cloud here. Okay, yeah, what I'm going to just show you guys are Photoshop or filters in Illustrator. So if you select a shape that you're drawing and go up here to Effect, these are all different things that you can do to your shape. So all these ones down here do some kind of weird, interesting stuff. Some work with just single shapes, some do not. So there you go. There's one, Conte crayon, charcoal, water paper for some reason. I don't know what all these are or do, but it's worth kind of experimenting and seeing these different options. So these ones are kind of cool. These could be used for different textures in your scene. This one's kind of like a brick looking texture. Stained glass, different things you could use. So let me cancel this and I'll just repeat where that is. So that's here. You select whatever shape you want to add the filter to and you go to Effect. All these ones down here bring up that extra menu I showed you, okay? So it's good to maybe you go in and just experiment after class and see if any of these might work for something in your project. But the one I wanted to show you, the one that kind of is most useful, I've seen in a lot of good projects I've used before, is going to affect, stylize, feather. Effect, stylize, feather. And you see, this just kind of makes my shape a little bit fuzzy. I hit OK. So now I got kind of a fuzzy shape. And that can be very cool and useful in your composition. But with any of these filters, especially one like this, my advice is do not overuse them. Don't use them all over the composition. Do not use it, on lots and lots of shapes. Use it in just one or two places in the composition. So this blur filter is a good way to make it feel kind of light and fluffy. So if you want to make smoke, if you want to make clouds, maybe fire could work for this. Things like that. And also it's good for making things feel far away. So if we go back to our atmospheric perspective, so this one, I could put a fuzzy filter on the cloud or even on that building there. Same with this one, I could put a fuzzy filter on this piece of land or maybe even this one as well. And that kind of just makes it seem out of focus and make it seem really far away. So you probably don't want to do something like this on a focal point, or definitely not on a lot of different shapes. You want to just kind of reserve it for places where it makes sense in your composition. And you have a reason to use it. So you don't have to use it by any means, but it's just another option for kind of how to change up some of your shapes and maybe get a little bit more visual interest into your composition as you're creating that final art. So again, you select a shape, its effect. This one is stylize feather, effect, stylize feather. But all of these do different stuff to your shape. So it's worth kind of just checking out. What these, okay, yeah, see film grain, fresco. Plastic wrap. All right, some of these are useful, some don't actually do much. Again, just kind of going in and seeing what may work. Now, this one's kind of cool. This could be used for like the side of a building maybe, or maybe a texture on the ground or for some rocks. That one could be cool. Okay, any questions on anything we went over today? Those photo or Illustrator filters, or any perspective notes, questions? All right, so I expect you guys to be working on your final projects over the weekend. We'll plan on being back in the classroom on Monday. It should work for me to come in on Monday. I'm thinking that should be fine by then, but just keep an eye on Canvas in case any plans change. But for now, we will plan on being back in the classroom on Monday, and that will be our last day on campus together. We will be critiquing your work, looking at thumbnails, possibly workup sketches, possibly studies. And that's kind of my last chance to really get to see your work and make suggestions before you get to that final art or anything like that. If you're working ahead on your projects and you want feedback sooner and you're ready to move on, feel free to send it to me on Canvas. I will look it over. I will do some drawing on it and give you suggestions to move forward. But again, yeah, I'm expecting this to be a 2 or 3 week long or 2 week long project that you're working on little bits each day. I would say just put in kind of, 45 minutes to an hour each day, and you will end up getting a really good project on there. That's definitely better than just, putting in those 5 hours the day before it is due. Yeah, so that will be it for today. Pretty short lesson. Hopefully you guys can use the time saved going to campus and coming home on just working on your project. And then just, yeah, thanks again for meeting online, and message me with any questions that may come up.